These are we have with us today the candidates from our SMDs, and the SMDs are single member districts. The ANC 3C has actually 8 SMDs in it. 4 of the contests are uncontested, and then 4 of them are contested. But as I understand it, at least one of the candidates from the SMD 3C06, I believe, has dropped out. So that is now. So we actually have 3 contested candidates. Before we even get started, we have Nick Eide and Saleh Siddiqui. Could you guys shake hands? Okay. And then we have Gawain Kripke and Wayne Gorlick. Would you shake hands, please? And finally, Keith Mantell and Rick Nash. And please shake hands. That's great. So we can see we're already off to a really good start here. I'm John Korbel. First of all, I'd like to thank Bar Weiner, our president of the CPCA, for all the work that he's done, and Susan Shrinkman, who unfortunately had to be in Oslo instead of here. So she could not make this, but she's the one that helped organize this entire event. As you know, as I think a lot of people in the room know, ANC 3C and our SMDs have changed a bit due to the redistricting process that happened recently. Parts of ANC 3C are in the new ANC 3A, but for many of us, these the SMDs that are now in 3C have been reconfigured a little bit. I hope by now you've had a chance to look at the map and see which SMD you're in. I've looked at mine, and I'm actually in ANC 3C08, which is Keith Mantell and Rick Nash's SMD. I hope to be neutral in this whole process. But anyway, I'd like to welcome Nick and Saleh and Gawain and Warren and Keith and Rick to this affair. I've lived in Cleveland Park for probably too long, more than a few decades. I cannot recall as much interest in the ANCs as I've seen this year, and I don't recall seeing so many SMDs that are contested, which I think contributes to the vitality of our neighborhood and probably a healthy exchange of views and ideas. But so ANC 3C05, which is Nick's and Saleh's, is bounded on the west by 34th Street, on the north by Tilden Sedgwick, on the east by Connecticut Avenue, Porter, 30th Street, Ordway, Connecticut Avenue, and on the south by Woodley Road. Pretty easy definition, I think, of a very, very clear definition. And a lot of that is to get the right number, to get the balance of people in each of those to be roughly equal. I think it was to a couple thousand people to make that work. And then ANC 3C07 is bounded on the west by Observatory Circle, Garfield Street, and 32nd Street, on the north by Woodley Road, on the east by Connecticut Avenue, Devonshire Place, Cortlandt Place, 28th Street, Cathedral Avenue, 27th Street, Garfield Street, 29th Street, Calvert Street, Connecticut Avenue. That was pretty simple for an eastern border. And on the south by Whitehaven Street and the Shoreham Drive, as I recall, is the right way. And please don't correct me on that, but I think it's pretty close. And then finally 3C08, which, as I said, is my SMD, is bounded on the west by Wisconsin Avenue, Woodley Road, 36th Street, and on the north by Porter Street, 35th Street, and Rodman Street, and on the east by 34th Street, Woodley Road, 32nd Street, Garfield Street, and 34th Street, and on the south by Observatory Circle and Calvert Street, I think is. And it's a pretty unusually long SMD is the way I would characterize it. In terms of today, let me just lay down the ground rules. we have to finish by 7:45, and we're now getting close to 6:45, so we have a little over an hour to speak among ourselves. I'll try and keep time. When you ask a question, please ask a question. Avoid making a lengthy statement. You can write your question on one of the cards, or I guess we don't have cards that are coming around. So if you want to ask a question from here, we'll give you the microphone, and we want you to, when I ask a question, we'd like you to identify yourself, and what SMD you're in, and to whom you're directing the question, whether it's to one of the SMD candidates or to all six candidates in this case. So following that lengthy introduction, what we're going to do now is we're going to have some opening statements by the candidates, about a minute or so each, and then we're going to have a few questions. Since we lost a couple of candidates, it could go to a minute and 15 seconds. And then I have a few questions that I'd like to ask, and then we're going to open it up to the floor, and you can ask questions of the candidates. So let's begin, and I think maybe we'll just start down at the far end with Nick. If you can give your opening statement, and then we'll go to Saleh and right along the table. Okay? Thank you.
You want to give me that mic?
Oh, no.
It works for the online, but not for here. So.
You might tell them on the online to turn down their volume. Because you're going to speak loud.
Oh, well, yeah. You might want to turn down your volume. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. I'm Nick. You may have seen my signs. I'm the Nick of Pick Nick. So, thank you all for coming, and for those online, thanks for tuning in. I am, first and foremost, a problem solver. I love puzzles. I love problems. I'm curious. I'm interested. That's what makes me tick. I have a master's in computer science from the University of Maryland, and I've spent my career building software systems of various kinds, Intelsat ground systems, and more recently clinicaltrials.gov for the NIH. What building software systems turns out to be all about is listening, asking questions, learning, questioning assumptions, understanding rules and constraints. All of this applies to being an ANC commissioner and the problems that the neighborhood faces. I've been on Macomb Street for 12 years, and shortly after I moved in, I discovered that the street has water issues. Very interesting, strange water issues, and if you've got many hours, I will talk to you about them. Suffice to say, I have now met with DC Water, DDOT, DC Department of Environment, Army Corps of Engineers, the National Park Service, Mary Chay's office, you name it, I've talked to them. Water is one of those things, out of sight, out of mind, until a pipe under the street collapses, and then suddenly it's a problem that people care a lot about. So I care a lot about infrastructure and water, and I will sort of work hard to do that. As the youngest of 7, I am learned from an early age to discuss and compromise. And that is truly my sole purpose in becoming an ANC commissioner, is to listen to your opinion and help you, the neighborhood, craft the right compromise that will work for everybody. And if it doesn't work for everybody, hopefully we can at least get a consensus that it's a reasonable solution. So I'm here to represent you. I have an open mind to address the issues that come before us.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Swali Siddiqui, and I'm very, very excited to be running for re-election. I'm coming up in my 10th year of living in Cleveland Park. Me and my wife and our dog Swift live in an apartment at the corner of Ordway and Connecticut. I really love this neighborhood. For me, like, being involved in the neighborhood didn't start with the ANC. It didn't even start with CPCA, which I was on the board of before that. It started way back in 2017 when Ripple closed. And at that time, I thought I should get involved, I should try and work hard, and I should try and do as many things as I can. So I joined the Economic Vitality Committee. That led me to meeting so many of you. And then I joined the CPCA. And now on the ANC, I'm so excited about all the stuff that we've done together. We've passed 22 resolutions on everything from transportation, housing, even small things like speed humps on Cortlandt Place that are right in front of Warren and on Rodman Street Northwest. We've advocated for different issues with the city, and we've really tried to figure out how to come together as a community. I've served as treasurer. Our ANC for the longest time gave out no grants. We saw that right now it's COVID and people need help, so we gave out grants to Ward 3 Mutual Aid and the Ward 3 Food Pantry, and so I was very excited to do that with everyone here. And then finally, I think the best thing that I've done, the thing I'm most proud about, is that I started a committee on the ANC, the Safe, Sustainable, and Equitable Transportation Committee. And when I joined the ANC, there was one committee, and community members were not allowed to join any of the committees. I asked community members to join this committee, and we actually had, people, one representative from CPCA, people from all different viewpoints joined. Mark Rosenman isn't here, but he was one of the first people I asked to join, and as many of you know, Mark has very different views than me, but that's what I really wanted from that. And that is why I'm so excited about today, because for me, the most important thing is community. The most important thing is to bring all of us together, have us talking, have us laughing, have us shaking hands. And so I'm really grateful that CPCA has done this. And honestly, I'm really grateful Nick is running, because that gets us to talk about these issues and actually engage. Whereas otherwise, if none of these seats were contested, we wouldn't be here today and we wouldn't be seeing everyone. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being engaged. And I hope this lasts. And I hope everyone here joins a committee on the ANC, because now we have them.
It's tough following Swale. That's not great. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Galwayne Kripke, and I am running in 07, which is sort of the rural southern end of the ANC. And why am I running? I'm running because I felt like it was time for me to get off the sidelines and quit complaining about stuff and try to get stuff done. I love this neighborhood. This neighborhood has been an incredible blessing for me and my family. My kids just showed up, which I'm glad they're here for my opening statement, and my wife as well. It's been amazing. It's been a revelation to me about how great a neighborhood could be. The schools, the amenities, the access to nature, the wonderful neighbors we have, and it's been. I've never lived in a place like this before, and I felt very privileged and honored to live here, and I feel a responsibility to maintain it and make sure it stays this neighborhood. All the good things are retained, but also that we can make it better. We have some problems. We have Connecticut Avenue, which has become a real debate point, but I think almost everyone agrees it's a mess and has been very dangerous. So we need to make our streets safer, our neighborhood as welcoming as possible, and preserve the good parts about it while bringing in new energy and vibrancy to it. I've also watched parts of the neighborhood decline, especially my favorite restaurants have closed. And so we really need to do something to energize the commercial areas of our neighborhood. And there's different theories about how to do that, but I think that should be a real goal for our ANC. Okay.
Thank you. I'm Warren Gorlick. I am also running in 3C07, which is, as Gawain just said, basically the western part of Woodley Park and Woodland Normanstown. I've lived on Cortlandt Place in Woodley Park for 30 years. I originally bought it, and it was a group house to the dismay of my neighbors. And I tried to become friendly with my neighbors, and over time, I was asked to join various boards and things, so I became the treasurer and now the secretary of the Woodley Park Community Association. And I would say, it's not just, a function. It was like very active things that we've done on the Connecticut Avenue bike lanes, on the Marriott redevelopment. These were controversial issues, to be sure, but I think I was part of the process that helped develop some compromises. Still, there are some things to work out. I'm the Ward 3 representative. Mary Che appointed me to the DC Bike Advisory Council. My fellow bike advisory members just elected me to be the president pro tem of the Bike Advisory Council. So I think that's an example of, that I'm engaged. I don't just join a body. And as Swally was just mentioning, just on our block, where we're having a real issue with speeding cars in the morning, rush hour in the afternoon, I led the petition drive and got the speed humps, which was a really interesting process. And like many things, there's the official process of getting the petitions. And then Swally and one other ANC commissioner told me about how the unofficial process works. So, and this was absolutely critical in achieving success. So I hope to do that on other issues facing the ANC.
Since Swally stood up, I'm going to stand up, so I'm not going to be outdone by you. My name is Keith Mantell. I was born in D.C., and my previous life, I served in the U.S. Army, deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, and then made my way back to D.C. And in 2016, started working in real estate. Then my late wife and I, we had our first child. We were living downtown and realized that it's kind of untenable for us to really do that. And so I was in kind of a unique position working in real estate that I've seen every single corner of this city. And so as I was looking for a home to raise my family, I chose intentionally Cleveland Park because I think it is literally the best neighborhood in the city. It's in my opinion, one of the best neighborhoods in the country. And so I will start all this by saying that I think what we have right now is great, but I think there are things that we can improve upon. I have 4 really basic platform issues. The first is safety, with a real emphasis on sidewalks. I have my daughter actually turned 3 today, so it's her birthday. Happy birthday, Noah. My other daughter's 18 months. And so I look at things through the lens of a parent pushing a stroller and know that what we have right now is sort of inadequate. The second point is sustainability, right? The future of, our future is going to be reliant on producing more green energy, living, with a smaller carbon footprint. The third is schools. We have no pre-K3 at any of the elementary schools in Ward 3, which to me doesn't make sense. Yep. That was the face I made too. And then the fourth and final one is public spaces. We have some amazing public spaces. My kids basically live at Macomb Rec Center, but there is room for improvement there in terms of making sure that it's really well maintained, that trash is picked up on time, and that the bathrooms are open for the caretakers. So, thank you for your time. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, Keith. My name is Rick Nash. I moved to Cleveland Park just over 20 years ago and moved here because, first, we thought it was a great place to raise kids. And secondly, what appealed to us is that Cleveland Park is a truly multi-generational community. From those who've lived here basically all their lives to those who've just arrived to some of our future voters like Gowan's kids. And I got engaged in the neighborhood, I think, for some of the same motivations that Keith has. I wanted to have a neighborhood that was, safe, where my kids could walk to school. And I became engaged as a parent, as an advocate, and as a leader of community organizations, as president of the Historical Society for several years, and as a director of the Rosedale Conservancy, our village green that is open to the public, which I've done since its inception. And what I focused on then and continue to focus on is traffic calming and improving our streets and sidewalks. And after years of pushing that. You know, there are issues on which we disagree, but one thing that gives me great optimism is that we have a moment here to, you know, to address issues like this. Also protecting our most important green spaces and our tree canopy, investing in our schools and infrastructure, which as a former John Eaton parent is important to me, and then promoting thoughtful, balanced growth that respects context, that addresses impacts, that prioritizes workforce housing, and through debate and dialogue leads to better decisions and I hope better outcomes. So these are my priorities, but my most important priority, if I were to be elected, is representing you. It's understanding your concerns, your views, advocating for them, and helping to craft better solutions. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Rick. And thanks to all of you for your opening statements and for pretty much sticking on time. Really appreciate that. We did provide a few questions in advance to the candidates so that they could organize their thoughts. And let me turn to those. Let me turn to the first one, which is, how do you see your role, how do you see the role of the ANC, both as a commission and your role as a commissioner? And in your answer, if you could also include your views on the role of a commissioner if there's a split in the community. So with that, let me kind of reverse it and start with Rick on that question, if you will.
Thanks, and I hope I'm not shouting to those of you who are listening online. So, you know, as I mentioned, can you hear? Okay. You know, as I said, the most important job of an ANC commissioner or an ANC commission is to understand and represent your views. You know, these are... Stand up. Sure. I said the most important job of an ANC and an ANC commissioner is to understand and represent your views, whether it's to DC agencies or to other members of the commission. It's to understand that residents are affected in different ways, whether it's by embassy chanceries or by projects or by transportation, and that decisions that are made often have ripple effects and consequences that have to be understood and addressed. And so that's a job of a commissioner. There are times, as you point out, when there are, you know, when public opinion is split. I mean, there are times when it's clear, like when the plan was proposed to split the neighborhood of Cleveland Park, which something like 86% of residents were against. And there are times where it's more divided, more nuanced. And I think if you were to take an example like a embassy or like a development project, realizing that, you know, if it goes forward, what's important is to work and understand impacts, to, you know, work to make it better, and to hopefully find a solution that most of the community can come behind. Thanks. Keith?
Okay. Hopefully everyone in the back can hear me. Yeah? Thumbs up. Awesome. So, you know, the role, I think my vision for the role of an ANC is to be that voice of the approximately 2,000 people in the single member district, right? So to start in the hyper local area and look at the concerns of my actual constituents or potentially constituents if Rick doesn't crush me in the election. And then from there go to the entire ANC, right? So then I'm starting to look at issues like Connecticut Avenue and bigger issues. But then really, you know, my job is to talk to the council member, right? So we're assuming Matt's going to win the election. I think that's a safe bet. And really to lobby on your behalf to him and really push issues up, you know, higher up. So it's not just local issues like a sidewalk, or some small like a speed bump, but really even some of the bigger issues. And I think my position on, because we're not all going to agree on issues, is that the role of an ANC is to be a leader, and a leader sometimes has to take positions that not everyone is going to agree with, and be okay understanding like this is my ultimately it comes down to the person in that seat, and it's this is my vision, this is what we think is going I think is going to be the best choice. Not everyone may agree with me, and that's okay, but to push kind of like this is ultimately what I am deciding to do, and we're going to push forward with it, even if it doesn't have necessarily, even if there's a 50-50 split, taking a position and sticking with it, taking input from the community, but understanding that we're not always going to agree on the same issue.
Thank you. I find myself in very positive agreement with everything that Rick and Keith just said. Likewise, I see there's a lot of purely local issues that ANCs have the critical mouthpiece on, something like sidewalks or speed bumps, or if a constituent might call about overflowing trash. There are these kind of issues that we have the lead. But then there's also bigger issues. If you go to my website, for example, you would see I go off on various things like, gee, could American University and George Washington help, since they don't pay property taxes like four-year colleges in other states do, might they help with tuition for local college residents? Now, obviously, things like that are not in the main purview of the ANC, but that doesn't, I've seen also, like, for example, with all of Swaley's resolutions, that you can make positive change and be a catalyst for these things. The other thing I just want to mention is, on probably the most controversial issue we're facing right now, the bike lane on Connecticut Avenue. There's a lot of work to be done still. Let's assume it's approved in concept C, as they call it, but there's a lot of nitty-gritty work to be done in the 2 years before construction begins, and I would really like to be part of that process to make it better. Thank you.
Okay, great. So until very recently, I considered ANCs like a real backwater. I mean, it was just a forum for complaining about stuff, and I didn't really engage that much with them. I was a local activist on some issues. Decades ago, I was an activist for getting the Klingel Trail in place, and kept that up, and it took 30 years, but it finally happened. It was amazing. But I never felt like the ANCs were an engine for positive change, mostly a place where ideas go to die or people just complain. I've been very inspired in the last couple of years by our own ANC, but also ANCs across the district, by a very much more energetic and also forward-looking constituency. ANCs that are coming up with interesting new ideas, ANCs that are really resolving neighborhood issues, and I think there's a sort of new role that I've seen for the ANC. Number one, it's problem solving. Stuff that comes up, things that break, that need help. That's the job of the ANC, is to make sure that the community gets the services it deserves, and to connect people with the people who can help them. So that's number one. Number two is looking ahead. There are planning processes, there are issues coming up that most citizens aren't aware of, but that the ANC, as being a bit more connected, can help make sure that their constituencies are actively engaged in the big issues that are coming up in the city and in our neighborhood. But then the last one is ideas, coming up with interesting ideas that may be innovative, might work, might not, and also holding our leaders accountable. It was one of the ANCs, actually, that first raised the ethics issues for Jack Evans. It came up out of ANCs that were concerned about it. So ANCs can also have a really important accountability role for our elected officials and for our government bureaucracies. So I see those as the three big things: is solving problems, looking ahead, and having big ideas and holding accountable.
So I don't think we should be called commissioners, because I think then this question gets asked at every forum. I actually think a better name for ANCs are connectors. So advisory neighborhood connector, and not should be called a commission, should be called an advisory neighborhood connection. And let me tell you what I mean by that. ANC commissioners connect you all to the broader DC government, right? If there's an issue that's really, really important to you and you really want to advocate for it, ANCs are a vehicle to get together, get the community together, and push that up because we have great weight. We don't have decision-making power, but we have great weight in what happens, right? So that's one way the connection works. The other way the connection works is that ANCs can help you all connect with services that the government is supposed to provide you, right? We get a dc.gov email address. That really helps in getting replies sometimes, and I'll give you all an example. One of my constituents came to me and said his father went to the DMV to renew his driver's license, and the DMV actually charged him tons of tickets, whereas they weren't his father's. And so he came back, his father told him, his father was like, I don't know, I just paid them because I figured I should pay them. And so he's been trying to get a refund from the DMV forever, and he said, can you do something? I said, probably not, I have no power, but I can send some emails. And so when I sent those emails, we actually got a response for that, right? And it's those type of connections that I think are very important when neighborhood issues show up, because a lot of times you feel separated from the DC government. And to answer your second question, John, when there's a split in the community, I actually love it when there's a split in the community, because a split in the community is actually a chance for us to do better than we have been doing. And let me talk about the bicycle lane example that has been brought up, right? 3 years ago, since we've been talking about the bicycle lane, DDOT came to us and said, there are all these issues. Are bicycles important to you? Is parking important to you? Are the reversible lanes important to you? And we were asked to balance all these issues. They're like, balance these issues, tell us what you want. But that's a problem. We didn't want to balance. We actually wanted better, right? And so when we, as a community, were split on that, we actually went back to DDOT and said, don't ask us to balance safety versus parking. Don't ask us to balance like people driving through the neighborhood versus the people that live here. There are things that don't have balance. We want you to do better. And so created Concept C, which has parking and bicycle lanes. The other concepts either had only bicycle lanes or only parking, some reversible lane, no reversible lane. It was very, very confusing. And that actually passed 711. It actually passed all over Connecticut Avenue with only 2 commissioners voting no everywhere. And so that's what I think when there's a split in the community, that we actually end up doing better than we would have. If we would have balanced that out, Connecticut Avenue would still have a high speed limit and the reversible lanes would still be there and we'd still be seeing crashes every day.
So I see the role of the commission and the commissioner is absolutely about representation. We are all about representing the community. Yes, we are a link between the residents and the DC government and services, but we are not a legislator. And we should not have a fixed agenda, and we should not be pushing our own agenda. We need to be conscious and respectful of all of our constituents. We need to try and find compromise. We need to approach topics with an open mind. We need to listen. We need to research. We need to seek true understanding of the underlying issues. And we need to reflect those viewpoints. We need to be looking for consensus. Of course, there are times when consensus is hard to find, and even harder is to actually know what the community wants. Certainly the listserv is a terrible measure of what the community wants. It is dominated by loud voices on one side or the other. What you have to do is you have to actively solicit input from the community, from neighbors. You need to go out and talk to them and find out how they're feeling about it. So I'm totally on board with I'm to represent. I'm not bringing my own agenda, and I'm going to listen to you with respect and try and address your issues. I think that the bike lane issue is, I'm sure we're going to be talking some more about it, so I won't talk more right now about it, but this is a great case of we need more work to bring more consensus around the future of the bike lane story.
And I for one hope we don't talk too much more about the bike lanes. Thank you very much for your answers there. Then next, but I think there was one of you talked about looking ahead. So next question, and I think we'll begin in the middle, going with you. to look ahead, and I think you might have mentioned this yourself, really, which is, what is your vision for Cleveland Park, for the Cleveland Park neighborhood, including your views of development? And that was me. I'm not going to use any of your time yet.
Go ahead first, John.
So development is, perhaps right there with the bike lanes as the most controversial issue. In Woodley Park, where I live, the issue has been the Marriott redevelopment. Here in Cleveland Park, I think there was a controversy about the Backland. I'll be very forthright with my views. I hope I'm not alienating people, but I think that we really need more development than we have to get the commercial districts more revitalized. I see too many empty storefronts, too many restaurants. We're not like a destination place that we apparently were in the 50s and 60s, where people would come in the suburbs. We really need local residents to support local businesses. So, I'll be blunt. I would favor redevelopment of the Sam's Park and Shop, the Exxon station, to have all that place for cars right next to the metro. To me, it doesn't make that much sense. So in the core corridors of Wisconsin Avenue and Connecticut Avenue, I see a whole lot of potential. And then just on the individual level, it would be very hard. We have a basement, but it would be very hard for me, which we would like to do, to rent it out as an accessory dwelling unit, even though the district said 2 or 3 years ago that they were liberalizing their rules on this. You still have to get a business license, which means you have to get a certificate of occupancy. I think there's a lot we could do just at the very local neighborhood to create more housing for individuals and for homeowners, particularly the retired. It's a source of potential income. So thank you.
Thanks. I can't believe Warren touched the third rail of Cleveland Park politics. The Park and Shop. It's amazing. Okay, it's a new day. Warren and I are absolutely on the same page here. I think that our neighborhood, the problems that we have in our commercial district, a lot of it are density related, and that the economy has changed, and that we need to change with it. And there are a couple ways to approach it. One is building more density. So more housing, more people here to support our businesses, and also to make the neighborhood more vibrant. So yes, I support more development, especially along the Connecticut Avenue strip, which has been rezoned to allow that. So I want to do it in a reasonable way. I want it to fit in with the neighborhood, but I want more. So that's one thing. I want to, and I think the ideas of making in the more residential areas reasonable accommodation for increasing density and more housing there also is a good idea. There's an exercise in revisioning the boulevard. I think we have one of the great American boulevards in front of us that can be fun and can be an attraction by itself. And we have incredible assets. We have the zoo, we have the cathedral, we have the Trevor Conservancy. There's reasons to come to our neighborhood, and our businesses should be able to take advantage of it without it disrupting too much our own neighborhoods, which are sometimes set back. But we can be welcoming to more people in a better way, and also our businesses can benefit from it. So revisioning how people come, why they come, where they spend money in this neighborhood, I think would be something that we can do. And there's a process in place to sort of begin to think about Cleveland Park and Woodley Park, about the future of the neighborhood and the commercial strips and how things would develop. And it's a real opportunity for us. And I'm sure we'll fight about it, but I think there's something big and important in it. And I think there's a lot of fun, like the events and the music and the things that we can do in this neighborhood that would make it more fun and more attractive, both for residents but also for visitors. Okay. We're going this way.
Me or I don't know.
I like the collegiality.
We keep running into each other out on the streets as we're, carrying our yard signs around. So
I also use the data Nick created on clinical trials. We're kind of colleagues.
I really like Cleveland Park. It's great, and I want it to thrive and grow. I don't want mega apartments, urban canyons, 10-story apartment buildings looming over crowded streets, gridlocked streets with idling cars, frustrated, angry drivers cutting through the side streets. I want thriving businesses. I want diversity. I want the small town feel in the city that I think we have today, and I want to enhance that. I want safe, quiet streets, and I want the historic character that we have today. We need some growth. It needs to be done with constraints. We need to be mindful of infrastructure. Our schools are at or over capacity. We have water, sewer, electricity. We're pushing limits all over the place on infrastructure. We can't just grow ignoring those realities. Our transportation grid needs to be excellent. If we're building more housing near the metro needs to be rock solid, and the bus system needs to be fast and needs to work and be reliable. We need more affordable housing. And by that I mean for families. And it needs to truly be affordable. One of the problems with much of the development that has been done is that it replaces rent-controlled units with inclusionary zoning units, usually fewer of them and more expensive. So that's less housing. They call it affordable housing. It's less affordable and less housing.
So when I started last time, someone asked me about what's unique about Cleveland Park, and I said it is the coziest neighborhood in DC. Where I live, within a block, we have a metro, we have a bus, we have a pharmacy, we have restaurants, and I love the coziness of our neighborhood. But the most important thing to a cozy community is the community. For our cozy neighborhood to survive, we need people in our neighborhood. And the results of not having enough people in our neighborhood are right in front of us, right? One thing that you can see that the businesses are struggling every day, as since 2017 is when I talked about in Ripple Close, there's just not enough people in our neighborhood to sustain our community and keep it going. Everyone here said we need some type of growth. So far, sorry, other people haven't spoken. Some type of growth, and I totally agree with that. We do need some type of growth. But right now, our community isn't designed for community. It's designed for people who drive through the community. It's designed for everyone else to just cut through and go through, right? And I actually think our business district is a wonderful place where we can actually have more development and create more housing, right? I think the height that the Macklin is in is a very, very good height. Those buildings over there are zoned for NC3 right now, which means you can build up to 4 stories. If we build up to 5, we get affordable housing with that. I think that's a good option that we should explore. And then towards the end, I actually also agree. I don't think development will solve our affordable housing crisis right now. We actually need every tool in the toolbox. We need Margaret, when she was advocating for the Wardman, to be purchased by the city. We need new housing to be built like the Macklin is being built. But we also need the opportunity that if a nonprofit developer comes into our neighborhood and says, I want to create a highly affordable place, but I can't afford anything, and the only place I can do it is on the Exxon, and perhaps I need to make it 6 or 7 stories, we should be ready to have that conversation. I don't know which way we would go on that, and I don't know which way I would go on that, but I want us to give the opportunity to make sure when a high level and deep level affordability option comes to us, that we're able to consider it and able to do it.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me? So, it's very easy to frame issues in this community is either or. One is for bike lanes or one is against bike lanes. One is for growth, one is against growth. And the reality is people look at facts and they look at context and they look at impacts. And also, issues are complicated. Now, we've talked about how we can support our local businesses, and some of them are struggling. But let's look at the data. A few years ago, the district government surveyed our merchants in Cleveland Park, And what they found was that, and this was surprising to me, their biggest concern wasn't a lack of customers. It wasn't density. I mean, if that were true, Van Ness would be a thriving commercial area. What they said was their biggest concern was a lack of available customer parking. And so, you know, I think we have to encourage all sorts of modes of transportation, particularly public transit, bicycles, walking on foot. We need to make our area attractive for pedestrians, but recognize, and this is one of the challenges of the Connecticut Avenue, you know, massive reconstruction, is that when you eliminate 50% of the parking, you are hurting those merchants. And let's turn to the growth point for a moment. You know, I agree with Soleil. You know, cities evolve, and you know, we're in a historic district here, but I think that sensitive development of 4, maybe up to 5 stories could be compatible with the historic fabric of the area, subject to setbacks and other transitions that highlight the historic buildings. And remember, we have the most intact array of Art Deco structures in the city. We have the iconic Uptown Theater. These are significant. But can I just say, you know, this district isn't about just Cleveland Park. It includes Massachusetts Avenue Heights and Woodley Park and others. And whether or not you live in an historic district or wherever, you know, people are looking at development issues, and what they want is development. What I'm hearing is that is sensitive to the context, that, you know, looks at impacts, that prioritizes workforce housing, and with a robust public process that makes them better. Thanks.
Yeah, so this is a tricky subject. So my house is basically right next to the intersection of 34th and Ordway. So I am almost halfway between the Wisconsin commercial corridor and the Connecticut commercial corridor. And there's kind of a pretty big difference between the two of them, right? Like if I walk over to the Giant or to Silver to have a meal, you can see it's kind of a little bit busier and like a little more hustle and bustle. And you come down here to Connecticut, and frankly, it's quieter, right? And I don't really like know why per se, but we have a, but I mean, okay. So there is parking. I mean, there's parking over by the Target. There are places to park. So I look at it as, so I do think adding density is a good thing for Connecticut Avenue. I think you see it. If you look at the density on Wisconsin and you look at the density here, it looks dramatically different. So the short answer is I am in favor of adding density to the commercial corridors. This has got to be one of the, you know, the Cleveland Park Metro here is a blessing to have it here, to allow people to transit through and to commute. And I think there's more investment that should go into this specific corridor. The other piece of that component, though, is preserving green spaces that we have. So I'm a huge proponent of, you know, Rick was instrumental in the Rosedale Conservancy. I live just across the street from it, and it is one of the like most beautiful places, I think, in the city. So continuing to make sure that we preserve the green spaces that we have is really important for my like continued vision of Cleveland Park.
No, but you can. But thank you. You're going to get a chance to speak in just 1 second. Thank you very much. I don't know about the rest of you, but I think we're really getting some interesting feedback from these candidates. Now I want you to have the opportunity to ask each other a question, and we did ask them to think about what they would want to ask their opponent. And what I'd like to do is start at your end, Swally. So what I'd like you to do is to ask your opponent a question, and I think I'm going to let you go first, Swally.
Nick, will you vote for me? So Nick, one of the things that I love to do as commissioner is that anytime we have a discussion or a resolution, I like to count up like everyone who's emailed on an issue and everyone who's like weighed in on an issue, and I like to tally up to see where the community is, because I really like to see, and like anyone who sends an email to all@anc3c.org, I read every email. I think, so I've been on the ANC 2 years. Since then, I think I think the only two times I've seen you sort of comment on, one was related to Washington International School, and the other one was related to an HPRB application close to your home. When we were discussing Concept C and I was tallying up all the votes for that, we didn't get to hear from you on what you preferred. And even before that, when I was on CPCA and I was the co-chair of the Transportation Committee, did the same thing. Got the members to talking about it and got every survey, right? And didn't get a chance to hear either. So I guess my question is, since this is now one of your main issues, there's Concept A, B, C, 2 versions of Concept D, and then the community created 2 versions of Concept E. Which of those versions would you have chosen and why?
So, thank you for that question. The bike lane story is interesting, and the community is really divided about it. And you're right. I'm coming to this particular issue relatively late in the game. And why is that? Well, for the Concept C discussions have been significantly held during the time of COVID over Zoom, and were entitled DDOT Connecticut Avenue Reversible Lane Study. All of those meetings were described thusly. Well, frankly, I didn't care very much about the reversible lane situation. It seemed like a reasonable thing to me to remove the reversible lanes, and I was fine with that. It didn't feel like a huge impact to the community. I didn't care one way or the other. Nowhere was that Concept C advertised as DDOT proposes to devote 1/3 of Connecticut Avenue for exclusive use by bikes and scooters. If that had been the headline, I'd have come to the meeting. And in fact, I think most of the community would have come to the meeting. We would have gotten the dialogue going instead of a misleading topic that much of the community was unaware of. I mean, at this point, most people are aware of it because it has now been sort of talked about a little more openly about sort of what's actually the plan. But it's been very quiet. And even now, I still find people when I walk around who say, "What? Really? 1/3 of Connecticut Avenue devoted exclusively to bikes and scooters? Nah, they can't really mean that."
It's not 1/3. There is 1 lane divided into 2 for bike lanes.
Sorry, 6 lanes on Connecticut Avenue, a bike lane on each side.
And there's a 24-hour parking on the other side.
Yeah, there is. Nick, it's your chance to ask Wally a question. And can you kind of keep it as much to a question than a statement?
I will. Mr. Siddiqui, in February of this year, 40 neighbors expressed their opposition to a sizable private sports complex in the environmentally sensitive ravine between Newark and Macomb Street. Why? Why did you ignore your constituents and the environmental impact of this project and continue to support the development, which the HPRB eventually rejected?
Thank you for asking that, Nick. Oops, sorry. And that was the one of the 2 times that you've engaged with the ANC. So I wasn't the commissioner for that area. That was the first thing to know. The commissioner was Nancy McWood. But you're right. I did not vote for Nancy McWood's resolution regarding that home. Since then, I've talked to a lot of community members, and a lot of them have said that not only was the vote, something that I did that was wrong, but also there could have been a better way that I engaged on it. And, as a commissioner, I agree. There's always ways for me to do better. There's always ways for me to listen to constituents. And I can tell you what I've done so far after that, because I do know this is an important issue for you as well. My view at that time, and I still hold that view, is that historic preservation is very important for protecting the aesthetic of our neighborhood. But when we depend on historic preservation to protect other things, such as the environment, or such as businesses, or anything other that we're dealing with, we're going to run into issues, right? When I voted on that as an ANC, I decided, usually when I vote on something on an ANC, I follow up with an email to the HPRB or something else. I didn't follow up at all, because I said, let the HPRB decide. My position wasn't if we should let this happen or not. My position was, as a historic preservation application, it's very difficult for an ANC commissioner to actually weigh in on it. And so that's why I did not want us to weigh in on it. Since then, I actually have talked to people who live right on the ravine. And, sorry, they're coming for me. And they've said, like, well, what can we do, right? And so the first thing I did was I reached out to DREA Urban Forestry, and I said, we have this really good green space. How can we protect it beyond historic preservation? Protect it like a green space. They said, well, it's private space. You got to reach out to DOE. I reached out to DOE, and I've said, this is green space that the community really values, that there's wildlife, there's lots of stuff, and the stream flows into Treguerin, and so it really impacts the water everywhere. How can we protect it? And so they said, all right, let us get back to you. We have to talk to some people, which is, yes, government takes a little bit of time, but I acknowledge. And so I am doing my best to undo that and make sure that we can protect the ravine through the right means.
Thank you.
My turn? Okay. This is a tricky one. All right, Rick. I don't have like a crazy question for you, so. Yeah. So my question is about Reno Road and 34th. There's currently a partial bike lane there. If a bike lane, a more permanent protected bike lane was proposed for Reno running down 34th to the Naval Observatory, how would you vote on that?
Well, you know, this is really, can you hear me? And thanks for that question. I mean, this is really an illustration of where an ANC representative needs to understand and listen to their constituents. I said this is really an illustration, and thanks for that question, Keith. Okay. There's no audio in the room, so I'll try to amplify if I could. So I appreciate the question, and this 34th Street is a perfect example of why an ANC commissioner needs to understand and listen to their constituents. Because I live near 34th Street too, and what I can tell you is that the safety situation is appalling, and it needs to be corrected. And you know, it already carries more traffic per lane mile than Connecticut Avenue, and that's a measure that traffic engineers use. And it goes by one public elementary school in Cleveland Park, a preschool, another elementary school a little bit up the road, adjacent to Beauvoir School, to National Cathedral School, not far from NCRC, and a host of other institutions. Can I have a few more seconds because we started late? And, you know, and now with the, you know, reconstruction of Connecticut Avenue, it's like squeezing a balloon. I think it's very likely that more traffic is going to be diverted there, more than what DDOT says. So, you know, the street needs to have a major look, and this would be one of my focus points, to have DDOT do that. But it's going to have to talk to residents who live along the road, as well as other residents in the SMD and the one that borders it. You know, and whether it's narrowed crosswalks at John Eaton School, or raised crosswalks, or, you know, a dedicated turning lane in parts, but not in others, maybe restoring parking on one side of the street, maybe a protected bike line. You know, the problem is I see blocks where kids walk along the side of the road and there is no tree box. There's a sidewalk that is about 3 feet wide with no room to expand it because one would, you know, there's very little space between the sidewalk and the houses, and yet the kids walk right alongside the moving traffic. And that safety situation has to be addressed. And I have some ideas, but I don't have a prescription. That's going to depend from talking to people and understanding their needs. Sure. So, you can see that there are a lot of issues that we agree on around this table. And I think that regardless of who's elected, there's a chance to work together on some significant issues. But Keith, I'd like to follow up on the growth question that John Korbel asked earlier. You've said in some candidate questionnaires that you've agreed with a statement that that historic districts and landmarks are problematic and that there are too many of them. And you've also written that you think that property owners should be able to make whatever changes they want in their properties subject to complying with the safety building codes, and that you would encourage developers to build as tall and dense as is allowed. And now you're running in an SMD that includes an historic district. And I'm interested in how you would reconcile your views with that and with the district law that alterations and new construction should be compatible with the character of that district.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think that's a good question. I appreciate it, and I know that's probably one of our biggest divergent points between you and me. I appreciate the historic nature of Cleveland Park and Woodley Park. I think some of the structures are beautiful. However, with that said, ultimately, the number of people on this planet and the number of people in the city is expanding, and we need to accommodate those people. And so if push comes to shove and someone needs to make someone wants to, I also am a big proponent of private property rights. And what that means is if it's your property, you should be able to, within the limits of, safety codes and regulations. I was speaking to a neighbor literally before I came down here who wanted to make improvements to her home to, make an addition to it, and was immediately shot down and was very frustrated by the process. So the short answer is yes, I think we should give individuals more latitude to make decisions about their own property over, the historic nature of that property.
Okay, well, we do have a few minutes left on questions. Oh, yeah, I forgot. I just wanted to make sure you were all paying attention. Why don't we go with Warren?
Okay. So, Gawain, it's clear from this conversation, and you and I have had other conversations too, I think we probably agree on more things than we disagree. I will raise one thing where I think we might not be in alignment, but I'd like to hear your views, and that is, and sorry, this is an issue that is particularly germane to Woodley Park. I apologize to those of you here from Cleveland Park, and it involves the Marriott Wardman Hotel site. This ANC 3C, passed a resolution in February 22 after the district had approved 900 units for the redevelopment of the site, and the developer of that site was in accord with the 900. But this ANC passed a resolution that called for the developer, Carmel Partners, to, and I'm quoting, increase the number of housing units to at least 1,200 units from the 900 units that had been approved. And so my question to you, Gawain, is if you had been on the ANC 3C, would you have voted in favor of that resolution?
I'd like to hedge, but yes, I would vote for it. I think that development is a huge missed opportunity for our neighborhood and for the city. And by going over the by rights, we would have had leverage to try to get more out of that development. More affordable housing, more amenities for the neighborhood, more commercial options. We could have gotten a lot more for the neighborhood and for the city if we got a bigger development there. So I would have supported it, and I think I'm really sad about it because I think it could have been something big and good for the city and for our neighborhood. And it said it's going to be fine, but it's you don't get these chances very often in a community to do something big and different. So I hope we don't miss the next one, and I would have voted for it. Warren, I'm going to give you. We're short on time, and this is I'm not trying to skewer you. Our SMD is mostly single-family housing, and it's in that way I think it's a little bit different than most of the other SMDs. So I just ask you kind of an open-ended question. Do you think the interests of our SMD are different, or how do you think that affects the interests of representing our SMD? That it's maybe characterized a little bit differently in terms of housing constituencies.
Thanks for that. That's a very interesting and thoughtful question. And what looking at it, and this does go back to the Wardman redevelopment site, because one of the ANC commissioners who came to a Woodley Park meeting, no one here, and we asked him, well, what would happen with the green space if there were 1,200? The response was, well, that's not my bailiwick. I'm not an architect. And there was basically no way to fit in 1,200 units there without eviscerating the green space, which would have meant, the Montessori school would not have had a playground anymore, the dog walkers and everything. So that's why, I was opposed to that, and a number of others were in Woodley Park. But more generally, to your question, Gawain, so yeah, I'm concerned sometimes that everybody conflates Woodley Park and Cleveland Park. They're different issues, different, like just the fundamental fact that Cleveland Park has a metro on two sides of the avenue, whereas Woodley Park is only on one side, has some. Yes, we do. It's a significant problem, and it's also a problem that when you get down to Woodley Park in the morning, at least pre-pandemic, and I fear it will start up again, you often had to wait 3 or 4 trains before you could even get on the train. I don't think, these are issues in Cleveland Park necessarily. So, we are on a residential street. I was interested in the exchanges now between Rick and Keith. I'd be a little concerned if there were an 8-story building right next to our house. So I think, but that doesn't mean that there can't be more development, like I was saying earlier, with accessory dwelling units and things like that. So, and then on the main corridors, which are purpose-built for higher density, then we should have that higher density. I hope that answers the question. That's good.
Thank you. We are, unfortunately, we are up against. You'll hear the librarian come on in just 1 minute asking everyone to clear out of the room. Was that well timed? So before we leave, I would like, first of all, I would like to thank all of these candidates for them. It was for me personally, this was one of the more informative discussions that I've heard in this type of forum, and we appreciate the give and take and the collegiality. And in some ways, for me personally, you've made it more difficult because you're really a good set of candidates for the ANC, and wish you all the best in this election. My apologies for those of you that have burning questions, but I think you covered most of the topics I think that are important to our community. Thanks very much. No, they are very tough on the time. But you're welcome to mill around and talk with others here. Once again, thank you for this, and thank you for participating.